John McCain pounded his hands into his fists and goes, "God damn it, Gene, we have to get this shit solved. This is going to be another fucking Vietnam." The Trump administration negotiated the release of 5,000 of their most lethal fighters and leaders. Again, you see that the President of the United States today still spewing bullshit. The Biden administration has the blame for not having listened to us and having planned the proper evacuation of these people in the first place. Why did we ever take a single service member out of Afghanistan before we moved our vulnerable Afghans will be the thing that haunts me till I die.
My guest today is Captain Matt Zeller, which probably in the last 24 to 48 hours, you've heard him all over the place. And this is not just a man that's sitting there calling out Biden. He's also calling out Trump. It's almost confusing where do we have this guy on CNN because he may call out Biden? Do we have him on Fox because he may call out Trump? He called out Stephen Miller. He called out everybody in the last 48 hours. My kind of a guy, because that's where you actually end up getting to the bottom of it to find out what's going on in Afghanistan, what's going on in Taliban. Could we have done anything differently or better? So with that being said, a fellow at the Truman Project for National Security, an adjunct fellow at the American Security Project, and a former intelligence analyst, Matt, thank you so much for being a guest on Valuetainment.
Thanks for having me.
So Matt, I've been following the story closely, but let's just assume somebody's watching this and all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, everything I see the video with the planes. I see folks trying to get on that C-17. I see the video where the body is dropping because they were hanging on. Then I see Biden did the interview with George where, George is asking, can we have done anything differently? No. Then we see Biden originally, when he made the message saying, we're confident about this. The Afghani military has 300,000 soldiers. We've trained them well. The Taliban only have 75,000. There's not going to be any issue. It's going to be fine. And then now we have this. So can you kind of bring us up to date, going back to 20 years, why we went there, how do we get here today, and what was a better way of exiting Afghanistan?
Sure. So we went to Afghanistan because of 9/11. We were there to defeat al-Qaeda and to remove the Taliban government and replace it with a democratically elected government chosen by the people. Over the last 20 years, our mission has then been to train, develop, mentor, guide, and assist the Afghan state in its growth, in its maturation. Nation building was not what we originally went to Afghanistan to do, but it's ultimately what we found ourselves doing in order to keep that counterterrorism mission successful, right? Because as long as the Afghan state is stable, people like the Taliban can't use it to host groups like al-Qaeda. That's the thought. Okay. So I went in Afghanistan in 2008. I was what is called an embedded combat advisor. So my job was I actually lived on an Afghan military base. I lived with 20 other Americans. We had about, at that point, 10 interpreters. So much one interpreter for every 2 Americans. And we partnered with them. We went on their missions. We ate their food, shared the same toilets. Our interpreters lived side by side with us. And the Afghans that we served with were our brothers and sisters. I'll be honest, they were a force that we always talked about how we were thankful we didn't have to be them because of how little they had. I remember I went to this one outpost. It was manned by 3 people. There was an old man and 2 children. One of the children fighters, one of the child soldiers, he claimed to be an Afghan police officer, probably had to have been no older than 14. He had on a Dolce & Gabbana hat that somehow he had gotten and literally no shoes, these kind of shorts and this weird looking shirt. It wasn't a uniform. It was just things that he had picked up at probably, at God only knows, hand-me-downs, something he had found on the street. He was basically in rags. His weapon couldn't fire. It didn't have a firing pin. It was just for show. And when I asked him where are the Taliban, he pointed at the house across the street. He said, they're there. And as soon as you leave, they're going to kill us because you've stopped here to see us. And now they think that you've armed us. So you've got to leave things to protect us behind. I asked him when the last time he had been paid. It hadn't been in 4 months. They hadn't been resupplied in 4 months. They were running out of food. When that's the level of support that you're giving and you're still showing up to the fight daily, I mean, my goodness, for anyone to question these people's dedication is preposterous. They didn't have body armor like we did. They didn't have the equipment like we did. They weren't supported or taken care of with the same logistics train or with medical stuff. So all of that is to say, I got back home from the war. While I was in Afghanistan, on my 14th day in country, my interpreter, this guy named Janis Sinwari, saved my life in a battle. He shot and killed 2 Taliban fighters who were about to kill me. And I made him a promise that if I could ever repay that life debt, all he had to do is ask. A year after our tour was over, I go to say goodbye to him. He's my best friend at that point. I reiterate that promise. I say, hey, man, I haven't forgotten about this. If you need anything, you call me up.
Got it.
3 weeks after I get home, this is now early 2009, he calls me up and he says, there's a bounty on my head for what I did for you. The Taliban have assigned a hit team. They are hunting me. I need to apply for a visa. And it just so happened that at that moment, Congress had created something called the Special Immigration Visa Program for Afghans. Here were the conditions. You had to have been given a year's worth of service. That service had to be deemed honorable and valuable by someone like me in uniform. So a soldier in uniform had to recommend you for the visa. You had to prove that you were in duress because of that service, that someone was trying to harm you and your family. And so long as you could then pass the most arduous background investigation that our national security apparatus could conduct, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, they're all going to look into you. And after looking into you, if they all say, hey, this person's not a threat, then they, their spouse, and their children were invited to come to the United States. And he asked if I would sponsor him for this thing. I said, sure, thinking naively it might take 6 months, a year. 4 years later, we were still waiting for his visa. At this point, he's working on a much larger base in Kabul, and he calls me up in July of 2013, and he says, hey, brother, I'm about to get laid off because the Americans are closing down the base, and they're giving it back to the Afghan army, and the Afghan army doesn't need interpreters. One of the privileges of being an interpreter was you got to live on the base with which you served at. So as long as you had a job, you were protected. He knew that by being laid off, he was going to have to move back home. And even though that was a mile and a half down the road in Kabul, he also knew that there was a Taliban hit team that lived just outside the front gate of the base waiting for him. So he said, you have till October to get me my visa or I'm a dead man. And at that point, I started this large scale public advocacy effort. I started calling up members of Congress, just cashing in any chip that I had, trying to get our country to do right by this guy. And what we ended up realizing was that we were going to have to publicly embarrass the government into doing the right thing in order to get his visa expedited. That ultimately worked. And I learned firsthand upon immigrating him here to the United States in October of 2013, just how difficult it was for him and his family. I thought there'd surely be some type of, government official at the airport with us to help greet him there and get him set up. Nothing. I learned at the airport, I was incumbent upon finding him a job, furnishing his home, finding him a place to live. There were going to be some limited charity assistance, but it clearly wasn't going to last him more than a month or two. So I started a GoFundMe page. We ended up raising $35,000 in 3 days for the guy. And it was enough to take care of his first years of food and rent, just allow him to enjoy his family for the first time. When I tried to give him this money, he refused to take it. And he insisted that we use it to start an organization to, as he put it, do for others as you've done for me. So that was the birth of No One Left Behind. He was actually very specific. He looked me in the eye and he said, what about Ihsan and Maiwand, Latif, and Jamshid, and Habib? He was naming all the other interpreters who had served on a little outpost back in Afghanistan, who at that point wanted to try to get here and deserved to be here. So that was the birth of No One Left Behind. That was 8 years and 50,000 people ago that the organizations helped get over here. But along the way, I got very involved in this visa journey. And what I learned was that for the first 4 years of the program, the Obama administration, it was willfully mismanaged by the State Department. They had an internal policy that we joked was called when in doubt, keep them out. The state argued that there was nothing in the law that compelled them to issue a visa, that law simply required them to make one available for application. And so what they were doing is they were receiving people's applications for this life-saving visa, and then rather than actually doing anything with it, they were simply taking it and putting them into a filing cabinet, never to be looked at again. So individuals would never have a decision rendered, and they would just sit there. And what ended up happening was that in addition to not making decisions, when they would briefly try to give someone a decision on their visa, they would often deny them that visa, and they would not tell them that under the law at that point, the applicant had no right to learn why a visa had been denied, nor appeal that denial.
This is
right?
09 to 13? What
09 to 13.
Okay.
And so this is key. I can prove it in numbers. there's a website called RAPSNet, WRAPSNET. If you Google that, RAPSNet Afghan SIV arrival, you can see there's an Excel spreadsheet can show up that shows from the State Department's data the arrival of all these people going back to 2009 by month, by year. The first 4 years of this program, Congress authorized a total of 6,000 visas. They were authorized in increments of 1,500 visas a year. And those visas were tragically use-lose, meaning that if you didn't use your allocation in a given fiscal year, if there was excess at the end of the year, it didn't roll over into your inventory. It just disappeared into the bureaucratic ether, never to be seen again. And so what ended up happening was that in those first 4 years, the program was so poorly mismanaged that instead of giving out a potential 6,000, and remember, each of these visas cover an entire family. It's not one person, it's a whole family, which on average is 4.4 people. So we're talking, at this point, almost around 28,000 people, right? Instead of potentially having moved 28,000 people in those first 4 years, we moved a total of 897 families. 897. In the year 2011, they could have given out 1,500 visas. They gave out 3. They moved a total of 47 people that year. So this massive backlog started to build up.
Do you know why or no? Do we have an answer on why?
The why is because State Department argued there was nothing in the law that compelled them to issue a decision on a visa. So all they were doing was taking people's applications, putting them into a filing cabinet and forgetting about them. Because again, the attitude within the State Department was, when in doubt, keep them out. They didn't want these people coming here at the time. So in 2013, Janice gets here in October. He arrived on a Thursday. On Monday, we were invited to meet with Senators Jeanne Shaheen and John McCain in Senator Shaheen's office on the Capitol in Washington, D.C. CBS News sent Jan Crawford to cover it, and there's a brief clip of us going in, me introducing Janice to the senators and then us going into his office.
Okay.
It was a private meeting, no cameras. For 20 minutes, we sat there and laid out the problems with the visa program, inherent as they were then, and why it had been so difficult for someone like Janice to get here when he clearly should have been here within just a couple of months of submitting an application. John McCain pounded his hands into his fists and goes, "God damn it, Gene, we have to get this shit solved. This is going to be another fucking Vietnam." He was pissed. He was really pissed. He saw this coming. And he looked at her and he said, "You have my full support, whatever it takes to get this fixed." And then he got up and he shook my hand and he said, "Thank you for what you're doing." And he walked out. Senator Shaheen at that point turned to her chief of staff and said, "Whatever they think needs to happen, we need to get it done. Can you guys come up with a solution now?" Janice's immigration attorney and I, Katie Reisner, then went down to the Senate dining room, which is in the basement of the Dirksen office building. It's a cafeteria. And we on a napkin sketched out what would become the verbatim language that was passed 3 weeks later in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2013. And that law fundamentally changes the SIV program, because the first thing that it did was every applicant had the right to appeal their denial. The second thing was that every applicant had the right to know why their applications were being denied in the first place. By the way, once we learned that, do you know what we learned was the most common denial up until that moment?
What's that?
For the first 4 years, they had misspelled their transliterated name. There's no standard naming convention for the name Mohammed in the U.S. government. Is it M-U-H-A-M-M-E-D? Is it M-O-H-A-M-M? Like you can think about all the various ways to spell Mohammed. There's no standard way to name people who are not using English script. And what the State Department had been claiming was because they had spelled their name and misspelled it somewhere else, that they were purposely trying to, hide their identity or whatever.
Let me ask you, is the concern that the wrong person could come in here and harm the country? Like, hey, let's not take the risk because we don't want another person to come in and cause another 9/11?
Exactly that. Yeah. Now, what you need to know is that this program has been around both for Iraqis and Afghans now since 2008 in some form. In that time, our country has welcomed just under 90,000 people. Not a single one has ever been tried, convicted, arrested, investigated for any type of material support to any type of terrorism. They are our most patriotic immigrants. Many of them go on to rejoin the U.S. military formally, and they all become citizens under this program. When I once was talking with Mitch McConnell's national security advisor, in regards to this program. His exact words were, when it comes to matters of immigration, we wish everyone had to go through the special immigration visa program. When we talk about extreme vetting, the SIV program is the gold standard. Those were his words. All right. So this is a program that Republicans and Democrats agree works and has been very efficient at not letting nefarious individuals in at. What I am arguing here, and what I was going after Stephen Miller for, and I'll get to it, is that a backlog started in the Obama administration in its first 4 years, that after we got this law fixed in 2013, and I'll review what those changes were, the program then started functioning as designed. And had it been allowed to continue in the Trump administration, we wouldn't have the problem we have right now in Afghanistan. The reason why we have this desperate rush is because we had such a large backlog. We had a backlog of around almost 90,000 people at this point who had been waiting for their visas on average 5 to 6 years. Just happens to coincide with the Trump administration, right? If we had processed their applications at the manner with which they were being done at the end of the Obama administration, these people would have been in America years ago, and we wouldn't be having this chaotic exit now. So again, the changes in 2013 were, we got the right to appeal their visa denial. We got them to give the right to know why their visa had been denied. Most importantly, we got the law changed so that the State Department was required by law to issue a decision on their application within 270 days of applying. So they had 9 months by law to give them a decision. And then we got the cap increase from $1,500 a year to $4,000 a year. Now, families. Now the numbers again, 2013 to 2019, 897 out of a total of 6,000 potential visas. The numbers from 2014 to 2017 are 4,000 families every single year. We hit the cap every single year. Okay.
4,000 families at the 4.4 mark.
At the 2000, yeah, exactly. At the 4.4 mark.
Got it.
Yeah, of the number of people per family. Then the Trump administration comes in. The first year alone, the arrivals dropped by 2,000 families. The next year, they dropped by another 1,000 to 1,500. By the end of the Trump administration in its last year, under 100 Afghan families come here. In 2019, the International Refugee Assistance Project sues the Trump administration in federal court and wins for violating the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act, the one that we were just talking about, the tenet that required the government to process an applicant's application within 270 days. They proved in federal court that the average length of processing time is currently 800 days. Now, it wasn't that back during the Obama administration. It got longer during the Trump administration, and that's where Stephen Miller comes in. Because as soon as he got into government, there are a myriad of articles out there on Politico. They did an entire in-depth, Axios, the Daily Caller, the Daily Beast. They've all gone after him. And what they've shown is that he was systematic in his purposeful deconstruction and evisceration of the overall refugee resettlement program in the United States. He set out to dismantle it from within the government, to push out career officials that had the expertise to make this function properly, right? Who would normally have been resisting his efforts, to replace them with willful sycophants who would do whatever he wanted them to do. He manipulated the mechanism of bureaucracy to such grind down the issuance of visas that it became nearly impossible for anyone to actually get here, right? And the numbers show that, okay? That's why the numbers drop off as dramatically as they do. But here's what didn't change. Afghans kept applying for the visa in droves. And so what was a backlog of around 6,000 or so families when the Obama administration left office ballooned to a backlog of 20,000 families by the time the Biden administration took office. And that's why we have the massive problem right now due in Kabul. So recognizing all of this was coming, in October of 2020, a lady by the name of Kim Stafiri, who is the founder, the mama bear of the whole movement is what we call her, but she's the founder of the Association of Wartime Allies. She calls me up and she says, Matt, it doesn't matter who's going to win the election next year. regardless of who the president is, we're leaving Afghanistan. And we've got to figure out a way to start getting these people out now because we're not going to be able to do it at the 11th hour. And I said, I agree with you, Kim. We need to sound the alarm. And the way that you do that in Washington, D.C. is you write a white paper. So over the holidays, she and I started and sat down and we wrote a white paper. And what we realized was in reevaluating the SIV program at that point, the Special Immigration Visa Program, we learned that it just simply wasn't functioning. And what we needed to do was prove to the administration that it was so hopelessly broken that the only real means of saving these people with the limited time that we had left was to begin the largest airlift that has occurred on this planet since the Berlin airlift in 1948. And this was critical, that we should start it immediately. And so as soon as the Biden administration took office, we sent that white paper, which was not publicly released at the time. We were trying to keep this private. We didn't want to sound the alarm. We didn't want to tip off the Taliban because our goal was not a chaotic exit. Imagine, right now you see on television the scenes at the airport in Kabul. That's other than what we call the Trump scenario, which was just the complete abandonment of these people to the evil that are the Taliban. This is the nightmare scenario. A collapse down to one airport in the country where there's only one working runway. And we've told every Afghan who wants to flee a future under the Taliban that their only realistic chance of doing that is to get to this X. It could not be more chaos than this, right? What we had advocated for back in February was the following. So let me take you through another alternate Earth where they paid attention and listened to us. Back in February, we controlled every single airfield in Afghanistan. We controlled the airfields in Mazar-e Sharif, Herat, Jalalabad, Kandahar, Helmand, and Lashkar Gah. You name it, we held it. Bagram, the largest airport in the country, we had it all.
How many total?
There were around 10 airfields that we controlled back then.
Okay.
All of them were the largest ones on the country. With honestly, if we had surged capacity, that given that the Afghan military hadn't collapsed, the Afghan military held the rest of the remaining airports. There wasn't a single airport held in the country by the Taliban at that point. Okay. So think of it this way. If you go on Wikipedia and you look up every airport that's in Afghanistan, there's a lot of them actually. Some of them are just dirt airstrips, right? But C-130s and C-17s can land on dirt airstrips. They're designed to do that. Every one of those airstrips was under the control of the Afghan military that had yet to collapse and a government that was still functioning and in place. So in this alternate scenario, here's what we proposed they do. We gave them a list of names. We said, these are all the people that we are tracking that need your immediate evacuation. Imagine if they had started it then. They had started reaching out to the people who are in the most furthest, hardest reach areas, the ones that they'd have to helicopter and get out to. And they'd fly special operations teams in the dead of night to pick up people and ferry them back to air bases, right? Imagine then if in the major cities, they started doing it in groups rather than just telling everyone come to the airport at once. They did it alphabetically by name, all right? Or they did it by maybe when they had first submitted their visa application so that they're taking the people who have been waiting in line the longest, right? And they took it in orderly chunks. You could have managed it in an efficient way where you were still having total security, not total security because the Taliban were dangerous and obviously making trouble, but way better than security than what you have now, right? In this scenario, we're moving people at a regular clip during the winter when it's not fighting season and the Taliban can't surge forces into the country and only we truly have the ability to move during winter, right?
So you had a small little window. You had a small window.
We had not just a small window, we had months. And we could have done that over months. We projected it out mathematically. We called it the devil's arithmetic. We actually plugged in, we went and took the average plane load, the average passenger load of a C-5, a C-17, a Boeing 777, a DC-10, right? Because we've got a bunch of those just like sitting in an area and a bunch of 737s. And we came up with the average passenger load is about 228 people you can fit on one of those planes, give or take. We then took the number, we divided it, and we realized you need about 314 flights to move all of these people. And if you're going to do that, over time, it's just an exponential thing, right? The longer your runway, the less flights per day you need. Right. The shorter your runway, the more flights. It's just math. It's just math. And we handed it to them. We handed it to them on a silver platter. We literally said, this is your evacuation plan. Here's how to do it. We even figured out how much it was going to cost. So in 1975, we moved 130,000 Vietnamese out of Saigon. And in 1996, we airlifted 6,600 of our Kurdish allies out of northern Iraq. And in 1999, we moved 20,000 of our Kosovar allies out of Kosovo. So we took those historical evacuations as a means to try to approximate cost. Really critical point, by the way. The 1975 evacuation was by far the most expensive because it was planned after the fact. It wasn't something that was planned for. That's a lot of people don't realize. We didn't evacuate in a planned way in Vietnam. It was chaotic. It was at the last moment. And Congress had to allocate funds afterwards, which is why it was so expensive. The Kurdish evacuation in 96 and the Kosovar evacuation in 99 were planned for ahead of time and were an order of magnitude by a factor of 4 cheaper. So what we learned is if you plan for it ahead of time, you can pay for it a lot more efficiently and effectively than if you're trying to do it now.
Yep.
So we extrapolated out the cost, and what it came down to is this. It comes down to about $700 million. That's what we argued. It would cost $700 million to move all 88 to 90,000 of these Afghans that we were tracking at that given time to the island of Guam, put them on the island temporarily, house them, process them, and then move them off to other places in the United States. Is exactly what we did in Vietnam. Now, I should point out in Vietnam, we had a couple of actual advantages that we don't have in Afghanistan. The first is we had an ocean to work with. So everybody there pretty much got put on boats. You know that famous helicopter image in Vietnam that everyone talks about? They think it's taking off of the embassy. It's actually taking off of the CIA station. It was the last helicopter out of Saigon. That helicopter didn't fly to the airport. It flew to a ship off the sea. It flew to an aircraft carrier because by that point, the North Vietnamese had overrun the airport in Saigon. We don't have that luxury here in Afghanistan. We're now seeing.
Yep.
Right now, flights, the day that we're talking about, Friday, August the 20th, for 12 hours today, flights stopped coming in and out of the airport in Afghanistan because we ran out of space to put people in Qatar because that's where we've been flying everybody to. And they just don't have any more space to put people. So for the last 48 hours, our country has gone hat in hand to every single other country on the planet and asked them, will you take our Afghans? Will you take our Afghans for us? Rather than simply sending them to the island of Guam. And this is what's so frustrating. The island of Guam has requested that these people be sent there. The governor of Guam on June 12th publicly sent a letter to the president formally requesting that Guam be used for this evacuation.
Yeah.
And that the island's government begin immediate consultations with the federal government to begin implementing this because they learned that in the Vietnam case and in the case with the Kurdish allies, they were given 72 hours notice before people started arriving on the island, and they wanted to start preparing it for as much as possible. Here's the best part about the Guam option. Guam's economy is dependent on tourism, and we all know that COVID has just wiped out tourism globally. Yep. Guam currently has something like 30,000 hotel rooms sitting vacant. They're desperate to fill them with, at this point, paying customers by Uncle Sam, right? Here's a way to rescue the Guam economy because their federal aid package literally runs out in 11 days, which is what the island's economy has been dependent on federal aid going back to the beginning of COVID now. That aid package ends in 11 days. The projection is that the economy will completely collapse and it could take 5 years to recover unless there's another aid infusion. Here's a way to not just give them money, but actually put people to work and house a bunch of needy Afghans in the exact same way that we did in Saigon in 75. And you're probably then asking, Matt, why aren't we doing this? I'll tell you why we're not doing this. The Department of Homeland Security wants the right to be able to deport people who they don't want to be able to bring into the United States. And the problem is that we're not screening anybody who's being put on these planes other than to make sure that they aren't wearing a suicide vest and carrying weapons, right? We really don't know that much about a lot of who these people are in some cases. They're trying to get a hold of that at the airport, but the lesson learned in Vietnam was they actually tried the same thing in Vietnam. For the evacuation of Vietnam took place about over the course of 2 weeks. And they did a big post-mortem at the end of it. And what they learned was that they shouldn't have tried to triage people's visa status at the airport. They should have just been putting people on planes and boats, bringing them to a safe haven, and then triaging them there. which is what they're finally now doing in Afghanistan. We've been arguing, they haven't been doing it for the last week. They're now finally doing it as of today. This is really important. We have a number of people now who are going to be getting out that we might not want to come here. The same standard of screening that would apply for the special immigration and visa program is clearly not being applied here, right? The reason why they don't want folks to go to Guam is they're afraid that anyone who goes to Guam, they can't kick out because U.S. anti-torture statutes stipulate that no one can be sent back to a country that they have a reasonable, credible fear of being tortured upon their return. And any Afghan is now going to be able to claim that. We had the same problem in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Of the 130,000 Vietnamese that we brought out, 1,200 of them we didn't want coming here. So you know what we did? We quietly made a deal with other countries in the region to take them. They've never been allowed in the United States. We should be doing the exact same thing now.
Is that
right?
pretty easy to do? Is that pretty easy to do?
Yes. Yeah. Guam is one plane flight away from Afghanistan. They could do it on a tank of gas. The problem is right now is, so you've heard about all these private charter flights that veterans are trying to organize.
Yeah.
I'm part of that movement. We're calling it the digital Dunkirk. It's veterans globally have just come out, and I don't just mean military veterans, I mean diplomats, aid workers. If you spent any time in Afghanistan in the last 20 years and you cared, you either came out one of two people. You either came home and you said that was interesting, but it wasn't for me, or like the vast majority of us, you came home having left a part of your soul back there and brought home part of the people and its culture in your blood. That's why I keep saying it's not a matter of us and them. This is a matter of us. These are our people.
Matt, let me ask you this. In October, you and Kim write that white paper. You send it to them. Did you ever hear back from anybody? Did anybody call you? Did anybody? Nothing. Nobody. Why do you think nobody reached out to you?
I don't know. Okay. It'll be the thing that'll haunt me for the rest of my life. You know when they finally did? Yesterday. I finally had a meeting with the head of the task force, Ambassador Jacobson, yesterday.
That doesn't make any sense to me, though. Why wouldn't they reach out?
I don't think they took us. The only thing I can think of is that either they didn't take us seriously, in which case they're incompetent and inept, or this was willful, that they didn't care, right? It's either a matter of they were inept, and because again, anybody who's looked at Afghanistan for the last 20 years knew that when we decided as of April, that was the key thing. When Biden announced publicly that we had a withdrawal, he put a date on the calendar and said, this is when we're gone by. Right. Then we went public with our report. We published it. We published the private report in April. I wrote an op-ed on April 2nd in Military Times. I'm quoting myself now. I said, when collapse occurs in Afghanistan, it will happen faster than Washington, D.C. can respond. Given Afghanistan's unique position in the world, America's geopolitical relations with some of its neighbors, and the difficulty of its terrain, it will necessitate the largest airlift since 1948 in order to evacuate our Afghan wartime allies. And to do that effectively and to prevent a chaotic exit, we need to begin that immediately. I published op-ed after op-ed. We were in Time. We were in CNN. We created a website, evacuateourallies.org. It's been live since, I think, May. We built a bipartisan coalition in Congress. 30 U.S. senators on May 18th, 15 Republicans, 15 Democrats, people like Ron Johnson, who does not think that the last presidential election was legitimate, and Patrick Leahy, who people think is a socialist from Vermont. Both of them signed. They don't agree on anything else in DC. Wow. They signed this letter together. Option number 7 on that letter requested that the administration begin the immediate evacuation of vulnerable Afghans. And they did nothing. They had a bipartisan coalition in Congress calling for this. You had veterans and experts in the media going public with this.
Right.
They wouldn't even take meetings with us. And so this is why I am adamant that when this is all over, there have to be immediate hearings on this. We have to investigate this to ensure it never happens again.
You know, in the business world, they say, yeah, we're going to come out with an MVP, or we're going to launch our product, right? Minimum viable product, whatever. Okay. And sometimes the technology guys will come back and they'll say, guys, I'm telling you, we're not ready to launch right now. If we do right now, there's going to be so many problems. Customers are going to be unhappy. It's going to backfire on us. I think we got to wait 3 more months. And sometimes the entrepreneur is going to be like, I think we do it no matter what. We had a deadline, we hit it. And then you launch it, and then everything breaks, and then you lose your business, right? Do you think there is an element of, no, we have to do it right now because we said we're going to do it right now. Let's announce it. Let's go. I know we're not prepared. Let's just go. And then all of a sudden becomes a cluster. Or was it more, we don't think it's going to be that problematic. We don't think it's going to be that big. Let's just go with it.
It's the latter.
Okay.
We don't think you're chicken little and saying the sky is falling, and we disagree, right? We think the visa program, they said publicly in testimony before Congress, we believe that the special immigration visa program is sufficient to move these people by the end of our withdrawal date. They said it over and over and over again. And at that point, they weren't processing more than a couple of hundred visa applications a month with a backlog of 20,000. Now that the president of the United States has said live on TV today that any vulnerable Afghan can get on a plane, do you know how many people we're talking about now? It's well past that 90,000. We're projecting at least 250,000 people have got to be moved.
From 90 to 250,000.
Yeah.
And how do you even filter them out now? Now it's even harder to filter people out.
Correct. Which is why the only thing that they should be doing is trying to maximize through. Look, again, it's a matter of logistics. I don't understand why they don't call up the CEO of FedEx and put them in charge of doing this, right? Like, if honestly, they're going to tell, the first thing that the CEO of FedEx is going to tell the president of the United States, sir, you don't have enough runway space. You're going to have to maximize throughput. We need more runway space. I know a number of runways right now that aren't being utilized in Afghanistan. Bagram, Mazar-e-Sharif, Herat, Kandahar, Helmand, Jalalabad. Yeah, they're currently held by the Taliban, but my goodness, we're the United States of America. Now, how much longer are we going to let bullies and thugs dictate to us, what we're going to do like this?
So that's kind of where I'm going to next. Here's where I'm going to next. In the interview with Brian Williams, you said a lot. You said a lot in a 10-minute period. And you started off saying, hey, it's got to be pretty honorable that our president came up and he took responsibility. What do you think? And then you just opened up and you said, we told him this was going to happen. Nobody contacted us. But there's a part of it that you said the Taliban are the same as the Nazis. I don't know how you exactly said it, but you compared Taliban to the Nazis. Yep. It seems like when I watch the news, some people are saying, well, the late, I don't know what her name is with CNN or MSNBC. She said, and by the way, she's very brave for being out there in the middle. She said, they're screaming behind me, death upon America, but they're also being very respectful. This is a pretty bizarre situation. And they say, no, we're going to treat women better. We're going to treat kids better, all that other stuff. How much do you believe that the Taliban is going to treat the Afghani people better once we leave them alone?
I believe what I already know. I have a 17-year-old client that was taken last night when he was getting groceries for his parents because his neighbors reported that his mom and dad had planned to move to America because his dad had been an interpreter. The guy hasn't been seen since, a 17-year-old kid. I have video of our clients being shot in Kandahar in a mass grave. I mean, literally, they took a backhoe, they dug a mass grave. The guy's head is being pulled like this from they're pulling him by his hair and they throw him into a mass grave and they shoot him. We know that they're going door to door in cities right now outside of Kabul and they're disappearing people. I have a guy, I'm going to be releasing it soon, a gentleman that I've been speaking to in Mazar-e-Sharif for weeks. He and I have been doing a private conversation, just one-on-one. He escaped Mazar-e-Sharif in the most audacious way. He snuck out by trying to pretend he was a woman and hid under a burqa and got on a bus and somehow made it to Kabul. When he got to Kabul, his neighbor called him and said, 30 minutes after you left your house, the Taliban raided your house looking for you. They said, we've been told a foreigner worked here. Someone who worked with foreign forces lived in this home. He needed to come with us. You know what this guy's job was? He was the IT guy. Wow. He was the IT guy. They're trying to kill the IT guy. I wasn't being hyperbolic when I said that they're going after even the people who collected our trash, right? Because you have to understand it from the Taliban's perspective. We spent the last year kicking their butt and killing them and their family members. They want revenge for anyone who helped us do that. It's in there's this code of honor called Pashtunwali. It's like a code of conduct amongst them. It stipulates that if anyone dishonored your family, the only way to reclaim your honor is to take violence upon them or you have to be paid.
What's their vision? What is the Taliban's vision?
The Taliban's vision is they were establishing an Islamic caliphate, which is what the Islamic State tried to do in Iraq. This, again, Taliban 1.0 and 2.0 are the exact same thing with one key difference. You know what it is? Here's the difference. Taliban 1.0 inherited a country that was in ruins, okay? It had been a country that the Soviets had bombed, and then the Afghans had fought themselves, and literally it was in rubble. They had a couple of working tanks. Taliban 2.0 has divisions worth of American military equipment, HUMRAPs, MVs. You see all their fighters are armed with American-made M4s with $1,200 ACOG, scopes on them. They have armed drones that cost $3.4 million per drone. They have attack aircraft, fighter jets, the modern day version of a P-51 Mustang. They have more helicopters than 166 nations on the planet, to include the country of Australia, which is a NATO ally. They're one of the most heavily armed powers in the region.
Yeah, and here's what I don't understand. Then how does a President Biden, with the intel that he has, say the Afghan military has 300,000, Taliban has only 75,000, they're going to be fine. We'll train them. They're good.
Well, that's the thing is that the forces I just gave you are all of the forces the Taliban just inherited when the Afghan government collapsed and they took over. What they had was this. They probably had about 70,000 fighters, and the Afghan army had been attrited. That 300,000 number was probably true as of a couple of years ago, but you have to understand that in 1 year, the Afghan military would suffer more casualties than we did in 20. Let me give you a really specific detail, okay?
Wow.
70,000 Afghan soldiers have died fighting the Taliban in the last 20 years. 70,000 that we know of. When we used to do the memorial service in Afghanistan, because we were allied nations, we would do it weekly. They would come out and they would read the names of the people who died. And, each person, they did this at ISAF headquarters in Kabul. And I'm told what they would do is the American would get up and the American would read the names of the Americans who died that week. And the British, governmental official would get up and do the same thing, and on down the line. The person who went last was the government official from the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. They didn't read a list of names. They just got up and said a number: 162, 188, 204. Because if they had read those names, they would have been there for hours. That's how many casualties they were taking weekly.
Matt, again, going back to it, isn't your intel supposed to give you, isn't your whoever you have on your administration supposed to give you this information where you make an educated decision on what to do next?
Again, you see that the president of the United States today still spewing bullshit, claiming that American citizens, there have been, very limited instances of American citizens who are being stopped by the Taliban, that they should just be, they've made a deal that the Taliban are supposed to let them through the checkpoint. Right after he did that, ABC News went live to one of their correspondents who's like, I was with a U.S. citizen who got beaten by the Taliban, and they were showing them their passports that were being denied being able to get through the checkpoints. Why are we, again, who negotiated with the Taliban? The Trump administration. You know how the Taliban had suddenly a ton of strength that they were able to do this? Because the Trump administration negotiated the release of 5,000 of their most lethal fighters and leaders. Those people, as soon as they got released, went back and planned this military coup and takeover of Afghanistan. The Trump administration is as much to blame for what happened here as the Biden administration. The Trump administration planted the seeds and set this whole horrible train derailment in motion. The Biden administration has the blame for not having listened to us and having planned the proper evacuation of these people in the first place. Again, why did we ever take a single service member out of Afghanistan before we moved our vulnerable Afghans will be the thing that haunts me till I die. That is going to be the question that I'll take with me to my grave. What
do you say to those that this has been going on for four presidencies, right? Let's just say with two Republicans, two Democrats, you hear everybody talking about it's been 20 years, trillions of dollars, et cetera, this many lives. We've seen all the statistics over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. We went in for Al-Qaeda. We went in for bin Laden, right? Okay, so bin Laden's gone in Pakistan. Al-Qaeda scored away. Some are saying, why are we still there? Why are we still there having all this money? Why? And by the way, this is not a Republican or a Democratic thing. There's a lot of people that are saying on both sides, let's just leave already. And then there's another community that is saying, look, if you do leave, just so you know, they're going to turn this into a training center. They're going to turn this into a recruiting camp. This thing's not going to change in decades. It's a mindset. It's a mentality that they have. You're going to make a big mistake leaving this place. And all these soldiers that lost their lives are sitting there saying, what the hell did I do serving all these tours in this place? So what do you say to both sides?
I say this. I say the mistake goes back to the Bush administration. I think we should have been George W. He should have just sat down with the American people and said, this is going to take a long time. These people need to be developed and educated. the way that we're going to win in Afghanistan is by the number of women we teach to read. That has been the metric that I've cared about the most, and let me explain why. The gentleman who saved my life, Janice, the morning after he did it, I met him in the chow hall, our dining facility on a little out. He was eating by himself. I walked over to him. You have to understand, this guy was a stranger to me. I'd been in Afghanistan for 2 weeks at that point. I had met him 10 days prior in a receiving line. We had set up all of 2 sentences to each other. Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I look forward to working with you. That's it. He's sitting there eating by himself. I sit down and I say, hey, man, can I join you? He says, sure. I said, let me ask you something. You saved my life yesterday. I don't understand. You don't even know me. You're a complete stranger. Why'd you do it? Why'd you kill those 2 guys? And he said, well, you're a guest in my country. I take the bullet before you. And I said, well, you're a hell of a shot. I'm really glad you're on our side. But why are you on our side? And he looked at me and goes, you know nothing about Afghans. And I said, you're right. Will you teach me? He said, okay, first lesson. Afghan men can't fight without the blessings of their mothers. I said, are you telling me that everybody on the other side of yesterday's battle had mom's permission to be there? He said, yeah, they sure do. I said, well, what makes your mom so much more enlightened than their mom? He said, oh, that's simple. My mom can read and write for herself. She's literate. She's read the Quran for herself. She knows what they preach in Islam is bullshit. That's why she forbade me from ever joining them. And then he looked at me and got really serious. He said, why do you think they burned down girls' schools? It's because they're afraid of an Afghanistan filled with moms like mine, because then their movement dies. That's the metric I've cared about the most. So yeah, the Taliban might claim that they're allowing women to be on TV in Kabul, but in every other city, they've been banned from public life. Banned from public life everywhere. The burqa is back across Afghanistan. You want to know what Afghanistan is going to look like after we leave? Just go outside of Kabul, right? So the so what of all of this is, there was a British conservative member, a conservative MP, a British member of parliament named Tom Tugahat, I think. I can't pronounce his last name, Tom something or another, who just gave one of the most impassioned speeches on this whole topic on the floor of the British parliament yesterday. It's going viral amongst the digital Dunkirk army, the online community of veterans that have mobilized and are literally, I'm doing a deployment from my office in my home right now, from my living room, right? I just weighed myself this morning. I've lost 11 pounds in the last week. I tried to count up the number of hours of sleep. I think I've slept 20 hours in 6 days, I think was what I was at. We are desperate to save these people because they're our brothers and sisters. And this guy, even though he's an elected member of parliament, he's a British military veteran of the Afghan war. And he so eloquently stated how we all feel about these people. And he talked about, the need to keep a promise and the problems with this chaotic exit, and the fact that it was unilaterally determined, that we didn't even talk and consult with our allies about this, right? And NATO is pissed. This is a serious consequence of this. NATO is furious at this. One of the most important parts of his speech, however, was he talked about the need for what he called, everyone talks about forever wars. He wanted to talk about forever peace. And he made the argument that he said, yeah, we spent a lot of money in Afghanistan, but it wasn't this bad. We had gotten it down to the point where there were 2,500 US troops that were holding back this dam. And I would argue that while that dam was being held, we were teaching a lot of girls to read. A lot of girls. Change is hard. It takes time. It's slow. Democracy is messy. We aren't even getting it right in our own country, right? Look at our last 4 years. Look at just the last, 8 months, right? Going back to just January 6th, a seminal moment now for our nation's history ever. Democracy is hard, even after how many, almost in 230 years, we're still not quite perfect at it, but we're trying.
It's crazy you're saying that. John Adams once said there was never a democracy yet that didn't commit suicide.
Yeah.
There was never a democracy that didn't yet commit suicide. Are we kind of like, have we lost our way? Have we lost what this great country was founded on, where a guy like me who escaped Iran after living there for 10 years, goes to Germany, lives in a refugee camp, comes to the States, serves at the 101st Airborne, this American dream to me of watching Rocky and Sylvester Stallone. If he can change and I can change, anybody can change. Man, one day I want to come to this great country where there's Ghostbusters and there's Gremlins and all this other stuff. And now it's kind of like, people around the world are watching saying, is America still America?
Yeah, man, it is. Because let me tell you about my brother, Janice. So my brother, Janice, the guy who saved my life, you know how he learned how to speak English? He watched, so Janice and his family, they're in Afghanistan, and you understand his life is just collapse after collapse after collapse. And he ends up spending 7 years in a refugee camp in Pakistan where 27 members of his family are all put into one room apartment. They're so poor that it takes a couple of months for them to save up enough money to buy a TV VCR combo. Remember those, the TV VCR combo?
Yep.
And they buy it off of like a guy at like his like house. And he said, look, the VCR works, it stops, it plays, it pauses, it rewinds, it fast forwards. It just doesn't eject. So whatever the movie is in the thing is the one movie you get to watch. That's it. You know what the movie was?
What's that?
Commando. That's how Janice learned how to speak English. He watched Commando over and over and over and over. And he was like, those guys are cool. I want to be like those guys. He saw pop culture, right? Janice now owns a house, provides for his family. His friend Ajmal Fakhri. Ajmal arrived in this country on January 1st, 2014, New Year's Eve day. There was no one there to greet him at the airport in San Francisco when he arrived because nobody knew he was coming because the State Department had given him a 72-hour visa and dared him to get to America before it expired. And Ajmal somehow sold everything in Kabul, packed the wife and the 4-year-old son, the 2-year-old kid onto a plane with, they're allowed to bring one bag per person. It has to be under 50 pounds and fit in an overhead flight bin. I mean, it's just crazy, right? They fly to the United States. They get here with 29 minutes to spare before their visa expires. That's when they cleared customs, 11:31 p.m. on December 31st, 2013. Ajmal turns to an officer at the San Francisco airport and says, I don't know where to go. What do I do next? And the guy goes, airport's closing, kid. It's going to be midnight. It's going to be a holiday. It's New Year's Eve. I don't know where to send you, but there's homeless shelters up in the city. I suggest you go there. Ajmal, his wife, 4-year-old son, 2-year-old daughter, then walk up the 101 freeway from San Francisco airport to downtown San Francisco, where for the next week they live on the streets. A week into this existence, Ajmal's wife is reading him the Riot Act in Dari. You know, you son of a bitch, I can't believe you got it. We used to have a house and blah, blah, blah. Now what the hell did you think you were doing? We had a life back there. She's giving him just the business when an Afghan American who had immigrated as part of the first diaspora in the mid-'80s, most of them settled in the greater San Francisco area in Fremont, California, walks by and hears Ajmal getting yelled at in his native tongue and stops and says, dude, why are you on the street begging for food? And Ajmal tells him his whole story. I was an interpreter. I got over here. I'm supposed to have had assistance. No one's helping me. Can you help me? And he says, do you know anyone in America? And he goes, yeah, I know this guy named Janice. My Janice.
Wow.
He lives in Virginia. Can you help me get there? He goes, do you know Janice's number? And he goes, no. He goes, all right, well, come back to my place. So Ajmal moves into this guy for about a week, and they start calling back to Afghanistan trying to get Janice's number because Janice had only just arrived here a couple of weeks earlier. And no one knows his new U.S. number yet. He finally gets a hold of Janice, who's standing next to me, and Janice turns to me and says, that money we raised and how we want to start that organization, can we make him the first case? I said, sure. So we fly Ajmal from San Francisco to DC. We get him an apartment. We put him up. We get him started. Ajmal's first job was delivering pizzas for Domino's.
Wow.
Ajmal is now one of the largest real estate agents in DC. He's a mogul. He employs a company, I think of about 10 or 11 other real estate agents, most of whom are now Afghans. And the Afghans who moved to DC exclusively buy their homes through Fakiri real estate. These people aren't coming to take our jobs. They're coming to create them by the buttload, right?
Love that.
They are the most entrepreneurial, industrious, wonderful people on the planet. I keep telling folks, I want people to befriend them. They will enrich and welcome your life. If you get to know these people, I guarantee you, they will be guests at your Thanksgiving dinner table, and you will join them for iftihar during Ramadan. Like, that's how close they're going to become to you.
I got 2 last questions for you before we wrap up. Here's one.
Sure.
Did the chances of 9/11 attack, since 20-year anniversary is coming up, did the chances of that increase in the last 2 weeks?
Absolutely.
By how much?
Exponentially as soon as we leave Afghanistan.
Got it. Okay. Second question is, there's a camp that says, look, no matter how much you hate the guy, and there's a group that loves him, there's a group that hates him. When he was president for 4 years, he was able to unite Palestine, Israel. He was able to, we didn't hear anything about ISIS. He was able to sit down with the biggest enemies and talk to them, Taliban, North Korea, all this other stuff. there was no major war or conflicts like this during the 4 years. Yes, COVID, but not war. What do you say to those who say if Trump was around today, this wouldn't have happened?
You say you're delusional. There were wars. He shouldn't have been talking to half of those people. None of those conversations amounted to anything. What did we get out of North Korea? Nothing. We got nothing out of those conversations other than making the North Korean regime look good. Look at so again, the fact that we had this Taliban takeover is because of the Trump administration's willingness to negotiate with thugs. The Taliban are not a legitimate government. They weren't democratically elected. They just orchestrated a coup. And the reason why they were able to do that was because Mike Pompeo, at the instructions of Donald Trump, allowed them to have this deal. When they signed the deal in Doha, you know what happened? This is eyewitness accounts from my friend JP Lawrence, who was in the room when they signed it in Doha. He just wrote about it on Stars and Stripes online. The Taliban pulled out phones and started taking selfies with each other, high-fiving, hooping it up because they knew they just got the deal of a lifetime. They had just won. We had just capitulated. Trump negotiated our surrender. You know what Pompeo had to tell them on the way out? He said his last remarks when he was leaving the room was, guys, just try and keep the violence to a minimum as you do this. We get that you got what you wanted, but don't make it like too bad for us. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? This is what the Biden administration is doing right now is the failure there is continuing to take the Trump doctrine and run with it. We shouldn't negotiate with the Taliban. We shouldn't have honored this deal. They weren't a legitimate government. No one elected. Hold on. No, this is key. Mullah Baradar was never elected by anybody to be the head of that organization. If the Taliban really wanted to take over Afghanistan, they should have run for election in the next. They should have run for office in the next election.
So, Matt, question for you. You seem like a pretty reasonable guy. And obviously, you said on the Brian Williams that you voted for Biden. Yet you called him out. So it's not like you voted for Trump. That's pretty obvious. But you voted for him and you called the guy out. Now, would you say Cuba is a democracy?
No.
Okay.
It should be.
Yeah, but
it suffers under the communist people.
I agree with
the communist regime.
You don't like it when you see a Trump go sit down with the North Korea president or Obama go sit down with Castro in Cuba for 3 days and go watch a baseball game together and have fun?
So let me tell you something. I had a lot of problems with that. Okay. Right. I think the American presidency is a sacred office and it shouldn't be pimped out to dictators.
Got it.
Right. If you're going to meet with a dictator, you better be doing something like Nixon did, which is opening up all of China. Right. Like it needs to be getting something. Like if you're going to sit down with Fidel Castro, you don't just get an embassy. Right. You get the Communist Party to allow for free and fair elections. Right. Because Fidel Castro has been trying to kill Americans for half a century. Yeah. Right. The Cuban regime is horrifically oppressive to its people. Right. And thank God the United States of America is but 90 miles away and has welcomed so many of its refugees.
Who did it right?
Shores.
Which president did it right? Who's the last president that did it right?
With Cuba?
No, just not even Cuba. Give me the last president that foreign policy did it right. Like you would say.
Harry Truman.
Oh, you're going that far. Give me 40 years, last 40 years.
I don't know if any of them did. Okay. Probably George H.W. Bush. George Herbert Walker Bush was probably our best foreign policy president.
Are you from the school of thought that a commander-in-chief needs to be somebody that served in the military?
No.
Okay, got it. Matt, first of all, do you have a podcast or no?
I do. It's called Wartime Allies. We interview the people who are these people. Like we're interviewing them live on the ground right now.
So we're going to put the link below there. We're going to put the link to your Twitter. What a fantastic conversation. I know more about what's going on there just by having a conversation with you. I hope the audience enjoyed it just as much as I did. Appreciate you for coming on, bud. This was great.
Thanks for having me. Please let me know when this is out because you're the first people that asked me to give this in detail. And I feel like I just kind of gave the world the dissertation they need.
I'm going to get my guys on it right now. We're going to try to turn it around next 2 to 3 hours. I'll send it to you and then we can share it with the world.
I would love to meet you at some point, by the way. I don't know if you ever come up to DC or whatnot. I might be down in Orlando in a couple of months. We'll have to see how my schedule plays out.
Come out, I'll treat you dinner. We'll do a red carpet treatment for you.
Awesome. I love it.
Appreciate you, buddy. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Anytime. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Whether you agree with Matt or not, this was probably the most thorough breakdown of what's really going on in the history of Afghanistan, Taliban, and different presidents, how they handled the situation. Curious to know what you took away from it. Comment below. If you liked it, put a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And on top of that, if you enjoyed this interview, I did an interview with a former Taliban member that turned MI6 that gave the life of a Taliban who was there directly with Osama bin Laden. It's a fascinating story. If you've never heard it, click over here to watch it. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.